Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, the truth about college admissions from college admission deans. A great article by Valerie Strauss of the Washington Post. Our question from a listener is, where do bright but underachieving B-average kids with ADD end up? Part 2 of 2 discussion with Lisa and Mark. Our interview is with Michael Fong, the founder of the Student Manager podcast, and that is part 1 of 2. And our college spotlight is the debut of our newest member, Sylvia Borgo. We'll be talking about UC San Diego.
Awesome. Also known as UCSD. All right, friends, just a really couple short announcements here this week. So last week, one of my recommended resources for you is the FAFSA walkthrough. And I'm always saying to access these, you can either go to our show notes or you can go to yourcollegebounkid.com and then check the resources tab. Well, 99% of the time when you do that, all you have to do is under the resources tab is either click books or websites. It's either a book or a website is mostly what we're referring. But sometimes we refer to things like podcasts, and this is a walkthrough. And so we do have a new category, which is other resources. So that's where you'll find the FAFSA walkthrough, the 2022-23, yourcollegebounkid.com, resources tab, and then go to the other resources tab, not the books or the resources tab. Okay. Friends, you are almost there. We are 11 surveys away from hitting our goal of 150. Thank you so much for the 9 that came in this week. I'm absolutely convinced you're going to get us there. We'd love your feedback on our survey, and we are learning a lot. I'm going to start to roll out little nuggets here and there that we've learned. To access our survey, just yourcollegebounkid.com. Resources, and you'll see listener survey. We'd be most grateful if you would participate. Okay, Dave.
Yep.
Our admissions tip for the week. The admissions tip is this. When you see a school and they share their admit percentage, let's make it concrete, 25%. The first thing your mind thinks is, I have a 1 in 4 chance. And the admissions tip is you cannot tell your admit chance by the acceptance rate. A school could have a 25% acceptance rate, and you could have a 2% chance. A school could have a 25% chance admission rate, and you could have a 95% chance. And so, believe it or not, you actually cannot tell your chances of getting in by the admissions percentage. Now, I know I've probably opened up a can of worms with that. And in order to get an answer to that, next week on 195, I'll do part 2 on that one to go into a little bit more depth. You know, I'm always dropping teases, Dave. You got to bring the listeners back.
Absolutely. It's like when I heard that, about 1% of all collegiate kids make the NBA. When I went to my JV tryout, my coach said that I had no chance.
Dave thought I'm in the 1%. By the way, that JV coach at Princeton, he appears to have really scarred you because every 30 or 50 episodes you bring back how the JV coach at Princeton said, get off the floor, dude. You have no shot here.
That's right.
I feel like there's some emotional scars. You might need a session with Lisa. I need a little therapy there.
He did offer me to be the manager. So, I mean, I could have made a great ball boy.
Awesome. All right, Dave. So we have our admissions vernacular, and I want to say this. I'm not trying to be a jerk over here, but these are getting harder, and the reason why they're getting harder is because we've done over 100 of them. And I know what Dave said. You can always give me an old one and rehash it to make me look smart, but So they're getting harder because, obviously I'm trying to do ones I've never done before.
That was my suggestion.
And believe it or not, I have a nice little stash of 50 in the kitty because I keep them in my phone app every time I think of one. I said, oh, I've never done that one. So they're getting a little harder. So I don't necessarily expect you to get them, but we'll roll them out. So here we go. Trend lines.
Trend lines. Well, we know that trends are when you have two discrete points in time that you connect to see which vector they're going in. So I assume they refer to maybe a student's grades, how they're going over time.
I have to give you credit for that, man. And I did not think you would get this one. Trend lines you're right. Actually, trend lines is a broad term that could be used in multiple ways. But the way I hear it used the most is to refer to grade trends, which are a really big part of how holistic schools that do holistic admissions evaluate students. If you think about what's the purpose of grades, grades are used as a predictor of what you can expect in college. And so whether you're on an upward trend or a downward trend, it actually matters a lot. It's a reflection of your mindset now. So that's a kind of a huge internal baseball talk. What are the trend lines? Meaning upward trend, downward trend. So good job, my friend. The winning streak is back on.
That's right.
Before I say something about the big number, I do want to comment on a comment that came in from one of our listeners. And this is and we love all our listeners and we love all the comments and they're helping us. And actually this one helped me too, because it made me realize people maybe don't understand our sense of humor. So this was the comment. It said, "Be nicer to Dave!" ! Your aggressive takedowns of his half-ass answers do not model good behavior. The kids are listening too! ! And so this is what I just want to say. Like Dave and I have known each other literally our whole lives. Everything we do, we compete. We'd be at his house for hours playing ping pong in his basement, pool in his basement. Then we go over to Banbury tennis courts, play for hours, and then Dave's basketball. And then we'd come back and stay up till 4 or 5 at night and play Risk. And we still do it, believe it or not. We're like a bunch of kids, right? Dave, myself, my brother Norm, his two brothers, Michael and Andrew. If for 1 minute Dave felt like I was disrespecting him, he would have no problem calling me out, and I would edit it out of the final version. So he's a good sport. We joke around. Maybe people just kind of don't get our sense of humor. Any thoughts, Dave? Am I being too harsh on you, man?
Nah, if you are, I just take you out in the back and we'll go a little one-on-one and I'll take you to the hoop. School you.
Still living in his Princeton dreams from 35, actually 40 years ago now.
That's right.
All right, let's go to the big number. So the big number doesn't sound too big until I explain it. The big number this week is 80. You think 80? You've been giving me numbers in the millions and billions, and now you're giving me 80? Well, 80 is a lot when 80 is followed by the percent sign 80. And that's what we're talking about today, 80%. Now, what's 80%? 80% is the increase in WashU's endowment in 1 year. That's insane. They went from $8.5 billion, which, by the way, there's a short list of about 60 schools in the country that have $1 billion endowment. So they're already at 8.5. They're already in the richest 1%. Now they come in at 15.3 billion. And you're like, how could that happen? Well, NACUBA is the number one source for endowment studies. We've had them before as a recommended resource. They run all kinds of articles in NACUBO if you're interested in this kind of thing. And NACUBA's done a study. And when you look at schools that are not as wealthy, and by that they define schools with endowments between 25 million and 50 million, their returns are actually quite paltry. And why? And I mean paltry, like in 2020, Dave, they were 1.6% return. Why? Well, they're usually investing in what we call traditional assets, real estate, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, that kind of thing. But what the more affluent schools do is they invest in more creative investments such as venture capital and private equity. And those investments take a lot of money, but basically the rich got richer this year, and a whole bunch of schools that are already in the 1%ers, they went up and they went up considerably. And WashU is the leader of the pack. Now, why is that significant? Well, guess what? Just 4 days ago, they announced they are throwing an extra $1 billion into financial aid per year. $800 million is going to new students, and $200 million will go for graduate students. And they also announced that they are returning back to being one of about 30 institutions that will be both need blind and meet full demonstrated need. So that's what you can do when you have that kind of money. So this is why I talk about this stuff. It's not sort of some esoteric exercise. It really does relate to the real experience of students. So shout out for the wise, smart people that invested that money in the private equity and the venture capital and took the endowment from 8.5 to 15.3 in 1 year. That's our big number today.
Very good.
All right, Dave, we got a great article. This is kind of really exciting. In fact, Dave and I were talking off record. It's so good, we're actually going to break this up into at least a three-parter. But why don't you take it away?
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
Well, the article is The Truth About College Admissions by College Admission Deans. It's an article, Washington Post, Valerie Strauss, The Truth About College Admissions by College Admission Deans. This is a compilation of quotes where a variety of college admission deans give insights on what they think encapsulates the fine points of the college admission process that we should know about. So I'm going to discuss three of those quotes. I'm going to throw it out, the quote. Mark can give the attribution, and he is going to give his insights, and we're going to discuss.
I just want to say something. Like Dave and I, we really love this article. Now, we've made some commitments for episodes 195 to 200. So we're going to kick it off now, and then we'll pick it back up probably at 201 and 202 for parts 2 and 3. So, we'll start it now, and then you'll get the rest of it in about 6 weeks. But it's the kind of article that's not going to make it disjointed. You're not going to be like, what did they say before? Because literally we're sharing their quotes, and we're discussing them.
Well, let's start with the one by Brennan Barnard. And he said, quote, "There is no silver bullet to a college acceptance. No one secret to being admitted to a highly selective college, and no guarantee." What do you think about that one, Mark?
Yeah, that's a great one. And that's a bonus one. We're going to do 3 others because Brendan, of course, the college counselor, the others are all admission deans, but that is worthy of discussion, and it was in the article. I mean, there's so many things in there that's true. One, there's no guarantee. And sometimes it freaks people out because, I might have a student literally with perfect scores and almost an impeccable GPA, and they're valedictorian and all of that stuff. And then I'm listing schools for them, and I say, see this group of schools? These schools are still in the reach, stretch, challenge bucket because for every applicant, these schools are not a guarantee. I've adapted the language of Stephen Antonoff, one of the founders of our whole industry, who refers to these schools as wild cards. And we also referred to them a few weeks ago when he quoted Akil Bello as highly rejectives. There is a group of schools that I don't care how strong your profile is, unless you're a recruited athlete and you go through a pre-read process and you're told you have a spot, they're just not a guarantee. And there also is no secret magic bullet. A lot of times people think if I just write this kind of essay, or if I can get this recommendation from this senator, I'm good. I'm an easy street. It just doesn't work that way. I'm not trying to be negative, but actually trying to be positive because, tell you the truth, if you can emotionally prepare yourself that there's a certain kind of school that if I don't get in, I shouldn't be shocked, it kind of emotionally and mentally prepares you should that happen.
And you really have to. I mean, it's I'm always amazed at things that you thought were shoo-ins, like doing a mission trip has been so overdone, or founding a charity, it's been so overdone, and everybody's coming in with this score and that score and straight A's and that A's. And when I just see the list of kids who don't get into some of these schools, it truly is. I mean, Einstein wouldn't get it. So
yeah, and it's hard because sometimes it's just changed so much. And sometimes it's hard for parents to understand. And sometimes it's even hard for kids because, kids sort of like to live up to their parents. But listen, that's only a small sector of schools. The average acceptance rate is 67%. But that is a legitimate quote. And a lot of people are ambitious and they do like to shoot for the stars. And so it's important that we address that as well. What do we got, Dave? Let's do our first of our Dean's quotes.
The next Dean's quote is, "College admissions is not about finding the right college for you, but discovering the many across multiple levels of selectivity that will welcome you and challenge you to grow as a student and a person."
And this is an interesting one. This is actually by Bill Conley, who was the vice president of Bucknell. And I know you guys, because you're attentive listeners to our podcast, You know who the VP of Enrollment of Bucknell is now? It's Lisa Keegan, who was on our podcast the last 3 weeks. So yeah, this article actually came out in 2019, but there was nothing that was dated about it that made us not be able to use it. So yeah, Bill's moved on. He's no longer VP of Enrollment. This is a great quote, though, because sometimes people do fixate. That's why I don't really like this term dream school. You don't really hear me use it. I don't think I've ever used it on this podcast, because what I like to say to students is, let me ask you, is your house perfect? Is your home perfect? It's funny, Dave. I do this in a group meeting. They kind of turn to the left, look at their mom, look at their dad, look at their sibling, say no, well, I say, well, mine's not either. I guess what I say, is your high school perfect? No. Well, guess what? Your college won't be perfect. And so all of colleges is a compilation of a whole lot of families. And once again, I'm just trying to take a little bit of that utopia away, because that's what happens sometimes too much with this concept of dream school. Or I think some of us, myself included, have been a little guilty by saying college would be the best 4 years of your life, because I would say it was for me. But it's not for everybody. And what it can do is it can just create this mindset that if I can just discover that right one, you know what I mean? I get a slice of heaven on earth for 4 years. And that's actually very dangerous, because there's literally nowhere to go but down in terms of being disappointed. So I appreciate him mentioning it's not about finding that one right college. And something I don't think we say enough, and that is, there's multiple colleges you could be happy with. Sometimes I say to students and families, I say, for you to say there's only one school you could be happy with, that would be like saying there's only one job in the world that could ever make me happy. That's not the right mindset either. And so that piece in this quote from Bill Connolly is important, right? Not about one right college, not about this finding this dream, this utopia, but this is the other really important point he mentioned: multiple levels of selectivity. Multiple levels of selectivity. That's where people get in troubles, when they don't build a broad-based list. I'll never forget the call I got almost 3 years ago now. Student number 2 in her class out of 658. This was a school that ranked. And this was a pretty high-powered suburban school. And the student got shut out. So I'm getting the call in April, stressed out. I got in nowhere. How does that happen? Well, everyone constantly told her how smart she was. So what did she do? She comprised a list of the hardest schools in the country to get in. Got to have multiple levels of selectivity. And the last thing he said, which I like, he said that will welcome you and challenge you to grow as a student and a person. What I like about that is it's not just about the school where you'll be happiest, but it's also about the school that will be a trampoline and catapult you to prepare you for what you're going to do. And sometimes that might be some tough knocks, some difficult things that you go through as you get prepared. So anything you want to say on that, Dave, that I didn't cover?
Well, yeah, I just want to share our own experience, how you always told me and my daughter to comprise a list where, number one, you feel extremely confident that you will get into multiple schools on that list. And number two, and this was very important, learn to absolutely love your list, so that no matter where you got on your list, you would be happy and you would know that that's a great fit for you. And then number three, that there's no one college that's going to be the absolute right fit, that you're going to have multiple choices, and that you really are in the driver's seat. Comprising the list, loving everything on your list, and feeling confident that every school on your list will get you exactly where you need to go in life.
And you know what? I got to tell you, Dave, you and your daughter Lauren, your wife Frida, you guys were pretty model students. Like, you really, Dave really embraced this. It wasn't just talk for him. Like, they did, and it carried over to Lauren. They did love all their list. And Lauren was kind of an exceptional student. Like, I didn't even really let on to Dave as much as I truly felt this. I kind of felt she was probably going to get in everywhere. She was just that strong, but you just never know. And so you have to build your list as strong, as broadly based as you can. And you never had any entitlement. Even the schools that were not as selective, you were like, this is a fantastic school. It's great. I love the visit, and I'd be really proud for my daughter to go there. So I need to kind of I give you a hard time, but I need to bottle you up and package you and export you, because you had the perfect mindset going into the process.
All right. And I'm going to skip down, because I think this dovetails nicely with these other 2 points. And the next point is Selectivity has nothing to do with the quality of the education.
And that would be from Heidi Simon, who's a senior associate director of admission at the University of Kansas. So this is my challenge with this quote, David. I'm hoping I can adequately and accurately capture the nuance. Nuance is incredibly important. We have to be accurate with what we say. The problem with this quote is, to be honest, I don't believe it exactly as it said. So it says selectivity has nothing to do with quality. So let me explain my view, and I'd love your comments. I do believe one of the biggest things that impacts the quality of the education you get are the students that you're around. When you look at 168 hours in the week, which is just 24 times 7, 168, right? Let's say you sleep 7 hours a night, which most college students are not sleeping that much. I know I never sleep 7 hours a night, but anyway, let's just say you do. There's 49 hours gone. Let's say you take a full-time course load, which is 15 hours. 15 hours basically means just 15 hours that you're in class. That's what that means. So let's take 15 hours in class and 49 hours sleeping. That's a total of 64 hours. There's 168 in the week. That leaves 104 hours. So what's happening in that 104 hours when you're not in school and you're not asleep? Well, guess what? You're around students. And I do believe the caliber of the person that you're around is one of the biggest things that can determine the quality of the education that you will receive. Are they students that will challenge you to be your best you? Are they students that model excellence? And by the way, that's not just academic excellence. That's also character, right? Character actually is more important. What do the people like? What kind of personal qualities do they have? So I do believe there's a correlation between selectivity and quality. However, what I would say is it's not one for one. You can't say, oh, this school's got an 8% acceptance rate and this school's got a 38. Therefore, it's the better institution to be at. There's a lot of flaws with that. And I'll mention a couple of the flaws quickly. One is, unfortunately, acceptance rates are something that are so easy to be manipulated. One of the easiest ways they're manipulated is there's not a common agreed upon definition of an application. So you've got a place, I'll use Georgia Tech, for example. They only count an application if it's completely done, 100% done, submittable, and a decision could be rendered. Other people count applications because you submit at part one. Other people count applications, what we call VIP apps, SNAP apps, priority apps, where you get something in the mail. It's already pre-filled out for you. It says your app fee is waived. You could be eligible for $20,000 scholarship. All you need to do is just sign here or whatever, right? Submit. And there's literally no work at all. Well, some schools count those as applications in their numbers. So one, there's no agreed upon definition of application, so people can fudge their numbers. People can also use early decision to completely manipulate acceptance rates. There's some schools, Dave, that take over 70% of their class early decision.
Wow.
So you have you have a small little group that comes in here, okay, early decision, and then massive amounts of people apply for these 30% of spots, driving the acceptance rate crazy low. So that's another way acceptance rates are manipulated. And the third thing is one school could be incredible, let's say, and I'll just make up a field, journalism, and another school may not. And so they might have an incredible program that's very, very selective, and you're around the students in that program. And so the acceptance rate, just as the overall acceptance rate, it doesn't deal with acceptance rates in individual programs. So it's not a one for one. And I just kind of like to know what your thoughts are. Do you agree with me that there's some component where selectivity, it relates to quality, but it's also very dangerous to just use acceptance rates in and of itself?
Absolutely. So yes. So you've pointed out that especially with the rise in the rankings in the last 20 years, some schools have gotten expert on manipulating selectivity purely for rising in rankings, and that the definition of selectivity varies and is completely arbitrary. You can have some schools like University of Chicago who used to be highly self-selecting, such that they had an acceptance rate of well over 30-40% going back several decades ago. And then, just because they wanted to manipulate the criteria to rise in the rankings, they've gone to a selectivity rate of less than 60%. Doesn't mean that it's 5 times better than it used to be. It's just that they've manipulated the selectivity criteria for the purpose of rising in arbitrary rankings. So that's number one. But number two, it's true that there are differences between some institutions. If you look at fields of study, whether it's engineering or physics or so forth, or music. There clearly are schools that are better than others. So selectivity is not meaningless. It's just that it's not nearly as meaningful as we think it is.
So a couple of things. One, it's the extremes that I would pay attention to there, right? In the middle, it's not as significant. The extremes are. But I gotta say something, man. What's your beef with the University of Chicago? Look, if you ever visit Dave, you could almost throw a stone and hit the University of Chicago from his house. And you've been using them as your battering ram a couple weeks in a row. You know what I'm starting to think? They might have jacked you up with a parking ticket or something or two when you were over there. They're always the butt of all your bad examples these days.
Oh, they're just so pretentious. That's all. We are just so smart. That's all.
You don't like the essay questions.
Exactly.
All right, Dave, what's our next one?
Tell us why you like Captain Crunch and not the peanut butter variety kind.
Just remember, Lisa's on our team now. She's a grad.
That's right.
Tread lightly.
And make your question purely in mathematical, your answer in purely mathematical symbology. So here we go. All right. Lastly, okay, we're going to do one more.
That's our last one. Our last one.
Number 4. Families hold significantly more power in their college search and student success than they typically imagine possible.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I love the ones you're picking. This is Candace Boninger, and I don't know Candace, so I really apologize if I botched your last name up. But she's the Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Enrollment Management and the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Ohio University. I always laugh at these things, Dave. Sometimes, instead of schools giving people more money, they just make their title longer. I think this might be a case. The 3-line title. The Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Enrollment Management and the Director of Undergraduate. No, but listen, I'm half joking, but fantastic quote by Candace. This is something that sometimes admission offices say and the public doesn't believe it, but it actually is true. You say, how do we hold not just more power, but significantly more power? So here's how. There are, I use the conservative number, 23 to 2,400 four-year schools, because I'm only counting four-year accredited schools that are eligible for federal funds, that are bachelor's granting institutions that are nonprofits. You'll hear people say 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, and they'll either include for-profits or 2 years in there or certificate programs. So I'm using the conservative number, all right? So Dave and I were talking about this earlier yesterday, actually. If you were to line up all of the number of colleges like in a chart diagram. How many people apply to 1? How many apply to 2? How many apply to 3? How many apply to 4? How many apply to 5? How many apply to 6? How many apply to 7? The most common number of schools that students apply to is 1. I've seen stats that say 27% of people apply to 1 college. And I know that blows people away because when you're with college educated parents who are incomes are above national averages, that do national searches, nobody's going to apply to 1 college. But a lot of people do because a lot of people just go to school around the corner and they live at home. So the point is, I'm not trying to make a big deal of the fact that more people apply to 1 than anywhere else. But the point is, with 23 to 2,400 colleges out there, these schools are just vying to get your attention, first of all, just to apply. Okay? And I know the numbers are on the increase. Like more people apply to 7 or more colleges now than ever. But even still, according to the Higher Education Research Institute's freshman report, 36% of freshman first-time applicants applied to 7 or more colleges. And so think about the 23 to 2,400 colleges just trying to hope that they might be one of the 5 schools you apply to, the 6 schools you apply to. So you have all that power. And what do? They go to great lengths. Some schools literally buy over 500,000 names from the ACT, from the College Board. And they're using other real creative things that have emerged in recent years. Like a real popular one is Big Future. You can go on there and see who's inquiring about you. Or CapEx and some of these other creative sites. Niche. All these different ways to get names, to get lists of names, and just hope they can then put their multi-million-dollar marketing campaign at you and hope that you'll just become an applicant. And so you have all the power in terms of where you apply. Sure, they do have the power in terms of whether they admit you. So the pendulum swings from you having all the power to where you apply to them having all the power. But then let's say you apply to 9 schools and get in 4. Now you have all the power again. You're the one who picks and chooses. And the one way you can see how schools are aware that the student has all the power is to take a look at some of the most selective schools in the country. And I can tell you they are all incredibly conscious of whether or not the student is going to come. That's why they have ED. That's why they have ED2. That's why they have these YS essays, so they can study them very closely and see, did you do your research on us? Do you know us? Do you get us? Do you understand us? But also, do we think you're likely to come? That's why there's so much tracking that goes on. And schools do things like offer interviews to see who will take them. They do things like they send you mailers and have little perforated things for you to return, or go on and click this link. All these things to try to figure out who may be serious about them. But once they admit you, even really selective schools like the Johns Hopkins and the Dukes and the Northwesterns and all these kinds of places, they're very, very, very conscious, are you going to come? And the reason for that is if you got into that school, then you probably got into about 3 or 4 other schools that are difficult sometimes for them to compete with. So it's a true statement. You actually have the power. And when you think about that, that's a pretty liberating feeling. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Well, yeah, I completely agree. We've talked many, many times about the demographic cliff. We've talked many times about the fact that the vast majority of schools, particularly smaller schools, state schools, rural schools, are scrambling to get students. And when you look big picture, the chances of any high school graduate getting into a decent school is 100%, just on depending on which schools you apply to. So the student and the family are totally in the driver's seat. And when they recognize that, as Frank Bruni has often posited, that where you go is not who you'll be, that these are just vehicles to get you to your place. I think it should be a tremendous source of reassurance to families in the process that things are going to be okay, and that just get beyond the myth of selectivity and recognize that it's the student who has the options, not necessarily the college institutions as a whole.
And the last thing I'll share on this is, now this is not always the case, so I have to have some caveats here. But another place where families oftentimes hold more power than they think is in their ability to get a school to reevaluate their aid offer. Now, not everybody does it, but a lot of times schools, if they see a competitor, someone they deem was a competitor, gave you a better offer, they'll up their ante. This is why a lot of times it's an advantage to apply early action or regular admission or rolling, because you really do get to not only compare financial aid offers, but you get to see schools come back and change their offer to wow and will you in, where you don't get that with ED. Now, listen, I'm not anti-ED. One of my children did ED, one did not. So ED can be great in the appropriate situations. But it is a fact. I see it. I saw a pretty selective school, and I'm not going to mention who they are. But I will tell you this, they're one of these schools that fits in that highly rejective category, meaning an under 50% acceptance rate. They offered a student I worked with an offer. So the student is a freshman now at this school. So it worked. Their plan worked, by the way. But they offered, and the family didn't take it. The student did not ED. And 2 to 3 weeks later, they said a better offer. Another week and a half later, a better offer. And this was without the family even asking for it. So there's another place where, I don't want to make people think this happens all the time, but there's another place where you have more power. Oftentimes is your ability to get their initial offer to be improved. And why do they do that? Because they need you, and they know if they don't, they could lose you to a competitor. So just walk big and strong and proud. You have more power than you think, and you have more options than you think. And one of the reasons, back to the last point, Dave, I like to have a balanced list. You know what? It stings not getting in. I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast before, Dave, but I did not get into University of Michigan out of high school. And I arrogant as I was, I remember when I read that letter, I was stunned. I couldn't believe I didn't get in. And it stung, and it still bruises my ego to this day. So it does sting not getting in. And that's one reason why I like people to have balanced lists, because I like to see people's self-esteem enhanced through this process and not beaten down. And if you have like 9 schools on your list and, you say, okay, this one I'm going to get in and I'm going to take a shot at these other 8 and they're all maybe out of your range. A lot of times you end up feeling really beaten up at the end of the process. And so I'm all about kids having enhanced self-esteem and not diminished self-esteem.
And I think that's a very, very important point. The fact is that what we know is that this particular generation is really fragile compared to many. It's shown up in anxiety rates, depression rates, suicide rates. We now know that Instagram and Facebook can have real deleterious effects because there are all these mechanisms where kids compare each other to themselves to other people, have completely unrealistic expectations, and then opens themselves up for criticism to people who should otherwise have no bearing in their life. And, we talk about College Confidential, for example, a completely inaccurate and silly website that uses inaccurate statistics and statements to make even the best students feel insecure and inferior. So, parents, I really think it is important that you take control of this process and make sure that at the end of this day, your child's self-esteem and self-worth is reaffirmed and not destroyed. And one of the best ways to do this is start the process with the list where you know that your child is going to get into at least half those schools on the list, because nothing buffers rejection than an acceptance. And having that acceptance in hand and then being able to focus on that acceptance and the fact that, hey, this is still a great school and we're going to visit and we're going to see things. And I guarantee you that 90% of kids come the following September completely forget about a lot of the pain and suffering they went through in the early spring if they have a solid, accepted school that they like that they can now focus on. So I think that's very, very important, Mark.
Yeah, and I always have to have the caveat. There are some jewels on College Confidential if you can navigate through the junk to get to the jewels, and most people aren't able to do that. Some can, most can't. I occasionally go to College Confidential for a real niche topic discussion to see if they have had any experts who are posting on the respective topic. No, you're so right. It's been my experience, Dave, that I think because people are looking so much at things like acceptance rates and selectivity and rankings and what place has the most status in their local community, a lot of times when kids don't feel like they got into their top tier schools and maybe a little bit disappointed by the process, when they get to that college campus, so many times they're like, oh my goodness, this was a blessing in disguise. I had no idea this place was so amazing. And one of the reasons they didn't know the place was so amazing is because they were so into that whole thing about thinking selectivity equals quality in a pure sense. And so they're like, I'm going to my school that was ranked lower, that had a 39% acceptance rate, and I didn't get into my one that had a 19, and they feel a little bad about themselves. But when they get there, they realize what an incredible place they are really at. So stay positive, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Yeah, I have one more thing to say. Just remember.
Is it about University of Chicago? Because it is. I'm cutting you off. I'm starting to feel guilty sorry for one of our leading institutions in our country.
No,
that's your next door neighbor.
Don't treat colleges like some new status symbol, because Yeezy ain't going to make you Kanye. Gucci ain't going to make you a Kardashian. Harvard ain't going to make you Gates. It's you.
There you go. Like I always say, it's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there.
Awesome.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Lisa, we got fantastic response to your ADD last week.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
If we keep going at this rate, I'm going to be asking you for your autograph.
You won't be able to read it, so it won't be very satisfying for you.
So you're like all doctors, like those doctors in the hospital. Dave, this is a little tip. So Dave takes all these notes, detailed notes, and then we go into the start, and I can't tell how many times he can't read his writing. So I'm like typical
I'm the
doctor.
Same way.
Typical doctor.
Lily is the only one in our family with good handwriting. Everyone else has horrific handwriting.
Well, I can't say anything because I'm pathetic too. All right. So before we kick off with part 2 of ADD, which I'm very excited about, we are going to pick up our conversation on endowments because I want to get through it before 2022 gets here. And so we're doing our countdown. Today we'll talk about endowments going from 39 down to 30. But before I do that, there's actually a couple quotes on endowments that are both in Business Journal and the Kubu that I kind of liked, and I think maybe they'll help people understand endowments a little bit. So here's one. It says, while the majority of university endowment funds are restricted in how they can be used, typically specified by donors, endowment performance is a useful measure of an institution's overall financial health, higher ed experts say. For many institutions, endowment returns are a significant revenue stream, often covering portions of their operating expenses. And so, when I was director of annual giving back in 2001, we had over 975 designated different endowments. So, so it's not one of these things where money just comes in and automatically can be used as a donor wants. That's why the Mackenzie Scott gift was such a big deal, not only because of how much it was, but her money was unrestricted. And she just said to the institutions, you know your needs. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Use it however you please. But a lot of endowment is specified and designated. I think I've mentioned this once before on the podcast, but I'm giving $10,000 a year in honor of both of my kids to the school they graduated from for the CARES Fund and Joy Fund, and that's designated. The CARES Fund has to go to people that have never been overseas on an international trip and they can't afford it, and the Joy Fund has to go to people who are of great benefit and contributions to the school, but they're struggling financially to stay in. And without a gift, they might have to leave. And so that's designated. So they can't turn around and use that for a faculty increase or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And here's one other quote I like. It says, endowments aren't a checking account that schools can use with a debit card for any purpose, says Steve Bloom, Assistant Vice President of Government Relations at the American Council of Education, said in an interview earlier this week. They don't work like that. They're more like mutual funds, with, in many cases, thousands of separate funds with legal restrictions and how the money can be used dictated by the donors. But here's what I will say. When you're talking to schools, and I experienced this because I've said this before. I worked at two schools, one with a no endowment and one with a large endowment per student, and I saw the difference was like night and day. But when you talk to schools a lot of times and they see their competitors do something, oftentimes they'll be like, there's no way we can do that. We don't have that endowment. Like, for example, in 2018, Rice had their Rice Investment Initiative, free tuition for under $130K. And then in 2020, Stanford had basically a similar thing, no tuition for under $150K of income. And, you talk to other schools, it's like, how can we compete with that? We don't have the endowment. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a prelude before I jump into the numbers. Anything you want to say, Lisa?
No, I just, I was surprised to learn that an endowment usually isn't given all at the same time. I thought they would just write a check for $8 billion or something, but no, it's over several years, and it might come in the form of stocks, or it might come in all these different forms. And that surprised me.
Yeah. For Nietzsche and me, our endowment gift for the Cares and Joy Fund, we actually made a 10-year pledge. Of course, we're not rich, so we had to do it that way. And a lot of times people, they're in the wills, right? And it's allocated. A lot of times that's really common as well. So here we go, 39 through 30, and you're going to start to hear some names that are fairly familiar because these are the wealthiest schools in the country. University of Chicago at 39, $453,000 per student. Trinity University in San Antonio, 38. Bryn Mawr College, one of the original Seven Sisters, now what they just call the Sisters, 37th place, Bryn Mawr, PA. And now we are getting into the ones that are over $500,000 per student. So we're getting into the big boys, starting at 36. And at 36, we have Hamilton College in Hamilton, New York, $506,000 per student. 35, Berry College, Rome, Georgia, about 90 minutes from here, $526,000 per student. And then number 34, we do get a school I've never sent anybody to yet. Most of these schools I've sent 10 to 20 kids to, maybe more in some cases. Number 34, I have somebody I think may go there this year. It is the Webb Institute. Have you ever heard of that, Lisa? The Webb Institute?
No, I haven't. I'm sorry to say.
I'm not surprised they have 100 students. That's
wow.
why. But the Webb Institute is in Glen Clove, New York. It is an exclusively a school for naval architecture and marine engineering. So that's literally what you do. You go there if you want to. There's not that many schools that have naval engineering. I mean, very short list actually. You can really count them on just a little bit more than one hand. Most of them are the military schools, to be honest. So that's what they do, and they have a large endowment. And then at number 33, a school that Lisa and I visited both in April and again in September, a half an hour from where she lives, Duke University, 33. And in number 32, Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And in number 31, this school's getting a lot of ink because Lisa, earlier today, Dave and I recorded our segment, and this was the big number as well. So it was related to this school because their endowment went from $8.5 billion to $15.3 billion in 1 year. And that is Washington University in your town, St. Louis.
So how did they do that?
They invested really successfully in private equity and venture capital. And that's something that normally only the wealthiest schools do because it takes a lot of money to do it. So almost all of the really, really wealthy schools got a lot richer this year because venture capital and private equity did well. And the smaller schools with less endowments, not so much. So sort of sad. The rich got richer again, just like life, right? But
yes.
So here they're 31st, and they cracked the 624,000 per student. But with these new numbers coming out, they may be over $1 million per student with the new numbers, and they've probably gone from the 31st wealthiest school to the top 15, maybe even the top 10. So big move by WashU. Yeah. And, I don't want to say all this again because this would be the first part of the podcast, but they immediately launched a $1 billion financial aid initiative. They announced that 4 days ago, $800 million going to new students and $200 million going to grad students. So that's what you can do when you have that kind of money. All right. I'm excited for you to do part 2, Lisa. And there's a question I want to start us out with. And that is, I know you talked a lot about, you made a very powerful case for meds last time. But I can just hear a person out there saying one of two things. Either, I don't care what you say, I'm not going to use meds. And I just say that because I've encountered so many people like that. Or I like meds, but is there something else besides meds I can do?
Right.
And so I'd like you to speak to either the person that won't listen to you about meds or any doctor, no matter what, or the person that does listen to you, but they'd also maybe like some strategies, some habits, some things they can do in addition to meds. So what can you share with us?
Well, I think the number one thing that you can do, and this would be either if you do take meds or you don't take meds, but especially if you don't and you have ADD, is regular morning exercise. There's all these studies that say that kids who have ADD, who have like a 20 to 30 minute workout before school, do much better. I don't know if it just makes them tired or if it does something with their brain chemistry to allow them to concentrate more. So if you don't want to take meds, then you got to like go to the gym or start running around or jumping up and down, doing jumping jacks and sit-ups or something before school. So that is like the main thing. There are strategies that a person can use to develop more executive functioning skills, and those aren't necessarily dependent on medications. There are lots of organizers you can get, checklists. There's like the Pomodoro technique where you study or you do a task for 28 minutes and then you take a break, and there are timers for that. There are even executive functioning coaches who will help to teach you skills and help to keep you on track. The caveat I would say with all of those things is that they only work if the person really thinks they have a problem and they want to change, like all things in life, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So most people who have ADD as adults don't really have a lot of insight about the nature of their condition because to them, it's not so much a problem. It's more almost a problem for their family, their loved ones, their coworkers. And one ADD expert, I remember him saying that when he has a client that comes in and he says, "How's it going?" And they say, "Great." He never believes them until they're 30. He goes and then in the waiting room and he would ask like their wife or their mom, "How's it going?" And that's the version that he would use. So the best executive functioning coach in the world won't work if you don't listen to them and you don't do what they say. And that's the hard thing about ADD without meds. It's a hard thing with ADD with meds, but it's really hard without meds. And I have had friends who've hired like really pricey executive functioning coaches and been very disappointed in the results, not because of anything the coach did wrong, but their child would not do what the coach said. It just became, instead of the power struggle with the parents, now you're paying $200 an hour for your kid to fight with somebody else. So that is kind of the issue with that. But there absolutely are strategies. Anyone can learn executive functioning skills if they want to. You know, they're not rocket science. Pretty straightforward, pretty common sense. My daughter once asked me, Mom, how do you always know where your keys are? And I said, well, I just keep them in my purse. I never take them out of my purse unless I have to open the door. And then I put them right back in there. And she was just like, whoa, you know, that would never have occurred to her. Yeah. So, I mean, but there are lots of very common sense things a person could do. Meds or no meds. You just have to be motivated to make those changes.
I did not know you were going to come with exercise. You know, that was great. I thought you were going to talk more about things like keeping to-do lists and like checking things off and some of those sort of kinds of things. Are any of those kinds of things sort of standard ADD practice or not?
They absolutely are. And that's what I would say, like that's under sort of the umbrella of executive functioning strategies, list making, checklists. But, you know, again, you have to look at the checklist. So this was not a college student client, but a psychotherapy client. But this poor girl, she has type 1 diabetes and it's very brittle and she has terrible ADD. And, you know, she's 27, so her mom's not there to shove pills down her throat every day. So she will forget to take her meds. Then she forgets to check her blood sugar. Then her blood sugar is 400. Then she feels terrible. She can't think. It's just like, it's such a conundrum. And so she and I have tried everything under the sun that you can imagine. I mean, checklists, posters, phone reminders. I've tried bribing her. I mean, I'm not above it all. And nothing.
We know about that.
we know that I'm a briber. But
yeah, we know that it worked too with Lily for her test prep.
But, you know, there isn't. Nothing moved the needle on that. And she still has problems. She sees a nutritional therapist. She sees a dietitian. Her blood sugar, her A1C has been terrible for years. And I feel terrible. Like we can't get it to work. So, I mean, it only works if the person has the capacity to follow it, I guess is the bottom line.
And then what about hiring somebody is that something that you recommend, or is it you recommend if they're going to listen to the person, or, and if they are to hire, should they hire an executive functioning coach, or, I mean, somebody like you, does just all the clinical stuff in a range of categories.
Right. Well, I think if you really think that the kid is motivated, if your child is motivated to get some help, then by all means hire someone. Of course, lots of people are putting themselves out as ADD coaches and executive functioning coaches, and they have various levels of training. Some have worked in the field for years, are incredibly skilled. Some did a correspondence course or did 4 hours of an online class. So you really have to interview the person, and you really have to ask about what their qualifications. And I wouldn't spend your money on somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience, a track record, and maybe some more formal education under their belt.
That makes a lot of sense. And is this something that usually people's healthcare plan will cover? Or is it stuff that it's all out of pocket? It's out of pocket usually. Okay. Yeah. You were really quick on that one.
No. I would love it if I could get them to pay for that, but I can barely get them to pay for things when people really desperately need them for medical reasons sometimes.
Awesome. Well, this is great. Thanks for sharing that additional tidbit about how additional strategies people can use. Good stuff, Lisa. Anything else, or do you think we covered the advice for Christina and the other Christinas listening?
Well, I wanted to just talk a little bit, and I'm sure you have thoughts too about what kind of colleges are good for people with ADD.
Yeah. Why don't you go into the kind of colleges, and I'll mention some names too.
Absolutely. We got to drop the names. Well, I was kind of surprised to learn how colleges differ so greatly in the level in which they will provide support and accommodations for students. It's really by a case basis. In high schools are required by federal law to provide a certain level of accommodation and support, but colleges are not. And so that is really up to the student to advocate for themselves. And so for that reason, it's really important when you're making your college list to really investigate like what the Learning Disabilities Office, what they offer, what kind of supports they offer, how friendly they are, how easily they grant the accommodation, because you're probably going to need some of those things and you don't want it to be yet another battle. Kids who have ADD, they need preferential scheduling. That one thing that college kids with ADD have a hard time is making an 8 a.m. class. Like that is just a recipe for failure for most kids. And so if you can get them classes that start after noon, then they'll go. They're that 10:30 one, that's kind of on the bubble. But 8:30, 8 a.m., that's really hard for a lot of these kids. Because you have to think about it. When you get up in the morning, your medication's worn off. You have to remember to go get your medication, take your medication, and wait 15 minutes for it to start working. So by that time, you could go back to bed. You could start watching a show. You could forget to take your medication because you got distracted. So mornings are bad. And kids might need, again, extra time. They might need to sit at the front. They might need extra support, meeting with academic success tutor that the school might provide. So it's really important to look for that. I also think kids who have ADD do better in colleges that have small class sizes. So not a lot of large lectures where they're sitting there, they're not engaged, but classes with really involved teachers who are maybe gifted in involving students. And that's different. Like some colleges and universities have research orientations. And so their professors, they're not really into teaching that much. They're brilliant researchers, but they're just teaching because they have to. And so they're not that dynamic. They don't care that much. You go to some other colleges, teaching is the vocation of these professors. And they love it, and they love their students, and they love making a difference. And I think that's the kind of professor a kid with ADD generally needs. I also think that colleges that have experiential learning, that's not just all sitting in lectures, but, real life experiences, hands-on. And many people with ADD, they learn better when they're moving. My daughter she would do brilliantly on any test that she studied on while standing on the coffee table in the living room, singing and dancing while she memorized. Singing and making up lyrics, singing and dancing about whatever the material was. And it was loud and it would go on for hours, but it was effective, but kids with ADD, they need to move, they need to try things because you want them to really find their passion. If they have something they love to do and they get paid for it, that's great because their brain won't even want to run off. It'll be totally interested in what they're doing. So that's kind of the goal. But you want somebody to notice the kid didn't come to class. You want somebody to say, hey, you turned your work in late. You want somebody to really be attentive to what's going on with that student.
That sounds like not all cases, but in many cases, it's a smaller environment.
Yeah, I do think that's true.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know there's some schools that are a little bit on the larger side that have specialists. They have,
right.
And so I guess there's exceptions always, right? Because
right, like the University of Arizona, for instance, is a huge
the
school,
SALT Center.
But they have so much support. So in DePaul, the same way, big school, but they have so much support that it almost feels like a small school. So maybe the professor's not doing it, but somebody's got their eyes on that kid.
And then I also imagine there's degrees too, right? And there's always degrees of this because I know when we talk about colleges that have learning support, you have places that really have very substantial learning support, like a Landmark, for example. And then you have places, maybe where kids are not on sort of one level along the continuum, and they need less support. And you've got
right.
places like Lynn, that do a really good job. There are so many schools that it would be hard to mention all of them. And there's a lot of other factors that people want to look at. I know Adelphi's got a really strong reputation for what they do with ADHD as well and other things. What I would say, rather than getting into a long list, is I'll share 3 resources that are really, really good for people. One, you can Google College Express students with learning disabilities, And this is a list of schools that's been curated by experts that recommend it. And it's about 20 or 25 schools. And then I mentioned in the recommended resources a while ago, College Transitions, that has these really strong curated lists. So they've got a nice list of about 40 or so schools. And they'll break it down there by, is it LD? Is it ADHD? Is it all disabilities? Is it autism? For example, a place like Drexel, Fairleigh Dickinson, they've got strong, support specifically for autism. And then they'll just have different disabilities broken down as to what the school is known for. And then I've mentioned before as a recommended resource, so maybe 2 years ago now, we've had the podcast going for a while, so someone start saying 10 years ago I recommended it.
No original listener, will be there at that point.
Nobody remembers. Yeah, but I do recommend the book. It's the K&W Guide. It is a guide. It's a book that specializes in colleges. So Lisa, why don't you comment on it? Because you're familiar with the book. Why don't you comment on what you like about the book?
I think it's good. It really tells you what kind of support that the school offers in more detail. It gives you information about who to contact, what kind of disorders they're particularly good at helping with. And, it's just a great resource. I don't think it's any substitute for talking to people.
Sure.
And doing your own research, my daughter's college, it never really gets mentioned as a super supportive school. But before we committed, I called that office, and the Learning Disabilities office, and then we had a long talk, and they told me exactly what we needed to do. And they have been nothing but stellar in terms of offering accommodations and support.
That's Elon, everybody. Elon.
Yeah. And so even though they're not known for that, and maybe they're not known for all things with that, they've done a great job for us.
Yeah. And I remember doing an episode. I did a whole episode on learning differences, and I really talked in there about interviewing the team. Basically what Lisa did at Elon. Interview. I might say interview. I don't mean to make it so formal. Have conversations. Have
chat.
Conversations. Yes, chat. We've gone from interview to chat. I don't know what else we can go after that, but chat, have conversations with the people on the support team. And that might be worth going back and listening to that episode, because I did go into a little bit more detail about who to talk to, what you should expect, what the leadership of the center, how important that is, and the experience of the team members. So I'm no Lisa, but you can access this episode by looking up at episode YCBK 102 and going to the 3630 mark. And you'll see an answer to a question Johanna from Pennsylvania sent in when she asked, how can you find the best fit for a kid with dyslexia? Well, of course, that was about dyslexia. It will relate a lot to this question as well. By the way, if you're wondering, do I have all these episodes memorized? That would be nada. I just looked up YCBK, Learning Disability. I put it in Google, and it took me right to this episode. And I mention that because that's actually a great way for you, if you're trying to find out if we've ever addressed any topic you may be interested in, just to put your college-bound kid and the name of the thing, learning disability, whatever, put it in Google and see what pops up. Hopefully this was helpful, that this was so thorough, Lisa, that this is going to be a two-parter for us. We'll break it up and do part 1 and part 2. You were just on a roll, and I didn't want to stop you because you were just in your jam. And this is why I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. And I know so many people are, and so many of you have commented, by the way, in our survey that Lisa is thebomb.com. That's my words, not theirs, but that's basically what they said.
No one's ever called me that before, Mark. And maybe they won't ever again.
There's a first. That's what our listeners said. That's how I interpret it. Survey after survey has said you are a fantastic addition because, you bring a level of expertise in this and experience on so many levels, from your certifications and your practice to in your own family. And so I think this is really, really helpful, and I really appreciate you having on our team. So thank you, Lisa.
Oh, well, thank you. And I just wanted to say one final thing for Christina, is that, grades, like people who make good grades, in high school, that's not really like going to be the harbinger of like, that's going to be a successful person, the A student, because there are plenty of people who get B's in high school and kind of go with the C's, get degrees, philosophy in college, and they run major corporations. They're, engineers, they're flying planes. I mean, they're doing all the things and they're doing it really well. So some people's school just really isn't their jam, and that's okay. There's lots of ways to be smart.
See, Lisa, you're such a high achiever that you've turned it into C's mean degrees. Because when I was in grad school, we said D means degrees. But there's the University of Chicago, and you come in, you just have to elevate it. And the up, D's just was not acceptable. So C for a degree.
Well, I am a long time grade grubbing, grade obsessed person from kindergarten on. So a D is like pretty much like unthinkable to me.
Well, we heard that story when you got a C in gym because of the volleyball serve, and you realized you weren't going to be valedictorian in your freshman year. So we knew that story. So you already blew your cover on that one. We already know that.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, I mean, it's apparently I'm using this podcast to air all my old grievances, the gym teacher, the blabbermouth at school. I don't know what else I'm going to get out next, but
it's your personal therapy.
It is. It's not
session.
The purpose of this. So
it's okay. Whatever floats your boat. Thank you, Lisa.
All right. Thank you.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, this is a different kind of interview. I don't normally do interviews like this with Michael Fong. Normally, our interviews are with senior admission leaders or people that work in institutions or financial aid people, career center people, just different people related to college and occasionally with students. But I wanted to interview Michael for a couple of reasons. One, he's got a really compelling story about how he himself earned scholarship money I want you to hear. Secondly, he's very engaging and easy to listen to. I think you'll like his style. Thirdly, he's been on a boatload of college campuses, and he gives his perspective and opinion of what various campuses are like, and I think our listeners will enjoy that. But mostly because we don't do a lot of student spotlights. We don't. And I think it's important to hear from the student perspective, and so that's what he focuses on. And our survey that we just did right now, there's a question on there. What are your favorite interviews? Students, college admissions leaders, or senior educators other than college admissions leaders? And for at least our listenership, you guys like, number one was the senior admissions people, and number two was the ancillary educational leaders other than college admissions people. And so at least for our listener base, you don't necessarily want us to focus on students, but we think it's important. And what Michael does in part one is he gives his backstory, including the creative approach he took to win a scholarship to college. He tells us about the format of the Student Manager podcast. He tells us about the type of students he chooses to interview on his podcast. And he answers the question, how does he prevent a student from coming on a podcast and giving a biased view that would be unfair to the schools? Listen and enjoy. Friends, you're in for a treat today. I'm here with Michael Fong from California. Michael, before we dive into our topic and everything, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory? And we're going to be talking about podcasting today. So why don't you walk us kind of right up to what you're doing today?
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be on your podcast. Absolutely. The Student Manager podcast. I was a student manager in college for our basketball team. And I've been on about 125, 130 college campuses in the last 30 years. I do it for my love. I do it for the passion. And the goal is basically to help high school students and their parents with the college search and admission process. And this is my side hustle. I got a real job.
We know about that. So I have to tell you, friends, a little bit about how I met Michael. So we get some weeks we get more than 10 people that reach out and try to get on the podcast. And most of the time, overwhelming majority of the time, we don't accept them. But Michael was really intriguing to me because in talking to him, he reached out, he said, hey, I think that I offer something unique and I can see you offer something unique. Why don't you come on Student Manager podcast, and I'd be interested in coming on your podcast. Well, I'm not going to have anybody come on unless I think they're giving value to our listeners. But the timing was perfect for what Michael said, because you may remember, our regular listeners, that I was a guest on the Who Cares About College podcast, and I shared that. And I was having a conversation with a family, regular listeners of our podcast that I'm also working with, individually in Missouri. And they said, I really love that recommendation. Who cares about college? They said, because Mark, we love your podcast, but I'll be honest, you're not the only podcast we listen to. And what they like about Who Cares About College is it focuses on student interviews. And I thought, it's a great compliment to what I'm doing. Because while we have some student interviews here, we have like 3 or 4 a year, if that. And I want you getting all perspectives. I want you hearing our college spotlight, our interviews, but then the student perspective. And so when Michael reached out to me, he really intrigued me because he said, I focus a lot on student interviews. And I thought, wow, that's a nice compliment to what we're trying to do here. So Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit more, like what gave you the idea to come up with a podcast?
Great question, Mark. So I'm at 69 episodes, and I've been doing this for about a year and a half. And it all started when I had some of my friends that had their kids. They know I love college, athletics, and just visiting college campuses. They would ask me questions. They would say, Michael, what do you think about Georgia? What do you think about Washington? What do you think about this school? And I would give them my perspective. I said, well, you know what? I've been on this campus. It's rural or it's urban. And here's what I like about it. It's a small college town or it's in a city. And I'd say great facilities. The campus is just beautiful when you walk on it, the student union to the dorms. So I kind of gave my perspective. And I think about a year and a half ago, my buddy, actually, for some of your audience and followers and listeners, you might know the name Pronger. He's a hockey player. Sean Pronger goes, Fonger, you need to get this out there. You need to tell more people about what you're doing. So it kind of started with, I had a love, obviously my major was broadcast journalism, and I wanted to share and communicate what I love to do, and that's visit college campuses and tell people about it. But how am I going to do it? And that's when I started bringing aboard guests. Obviously, I have 3 kids, 2 of them in college, one at Washington and one at Wisconsin. And I just started having some of their friends on my podcast. I live out here in Southern California, Orange County. A lot of these kids were going outside of California. So there was great experience and great interaction in terms of, oh my gosh, that's a great school. I visited there. What do you like about it? So I like to have high school alumni that graduated high school, obviously, but at least finish 1 year of college to give my followers and listeners a different perspective of what it's actually like, rather than listening to a college counselor, a mission director, right? They're going to sell you on why you should be going to that school. Well, I wanted to really give my audience and followers what it's like to be maybe in the Greek system, or maybe what it's not all set out to be. The real raw stories, the good and the bad. And that's why I love having college students that have been through that process and that experience.
And I'll tell you another reason why this intrigued me. One thing that's fascinated me in this process is, how do you pull back the curtain? How do you really see the college, to be blunt, naked for who they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly? And I've thought about that question now for a couple decades. And one thing I keep coming back to is, what are the students like? What are the students like? And the reason I come back to that is because 168-hour week, you're in class about 15 hours, as if you're taking 15 credit hours. All right, that leaves 153 hours left in the week. Mind you, let's say you sleep, even if you sleep 7 a night, that's 49 hours. That still leaves 104 hours. You're around students in those 104 hours when you're not sleeping and you're not in class. So what those kids are like will have a demonstrable impact on your experience. So the more you can get a sense of what are the students like, the more you really get an insight into the culture. But you know what? I want to take you back, Michael. I feel like we jumped all the way into your podcasting, and I feel like there's a few holes I'd love to fill. So why don't you kind of take us back, like, where you grew up, anything you were involved in high school, your own college experience, and any, jobs and professions you've had. Walk us all the way up to your 51 years on this planet. I hope you don't mind me giving your age away.
No problem. And you know what? I like to always, turn to the end of the chapter and peel the story, peel the onion back. The Student Manager podcast, people are like probably wondering why the student manager. I was our student manager for the basketball team at Long Beach State. I went to Long Beach State in Southern California, and I was our student manager, right? In high school, I grew up in the Bay Area. Pleasanton. And at the time, I remember when I was a sophomore, okay, I didn't even play basketball in high school, but all my friends did. And they said, Michael, why don't you be part of the team? And I said, well, how am I going to be part of the team? They said, you could be a student manager. So I was our high school basketball manager. Didn't even know how to play basketball back then. Probably just, a little kid, and I'm Asian, not very tall, right? So, but I had a goal and a vision. In my sophomore year, I started writing colleges. I wrote college coaches. And I remember typing out letters. I wrote college coaches, and I said, do you offer scholarships for student managers?
Nice.
We weren't very affluent. Maybe that's where I got my sales skills back in high school, Mark. I started reaching out to college coaches. And how I did that, my selection process, I pulled up a Sports Illustrated magazine back in 1985. I looked at the top 25 colleges, and I said, here's where I'm going to write to the college coaches. I wrote Georgia Tech, Bobby Cremins. And to this day, because I've met him, he's the only coach that actually wrote me a handwritten letter back.
Nice.
And that went a long way, because in my personal life and my leadership skills today, I always value that personal handwritten letter. And we could talk about that just in terms of how students reach out to college admissions directors or that demonstrate interest, right? Being personal, how you separate yourself. So that's what I did. And Long Beach State popped up on my radar. I wrote a coach, and actually he got fired. Rod Palmer got fired, but the new coach wrote me a handwritten letter back. His name was Joe Harrington. He came from George Mason University out there on the East Coast. So he wrote me a letter back, and he said, hey, if you want to come down to college here and be our student manager, just call me. So I called him, and I said, yeah, I'm interested. So I thought I was big time. I called him, and I said, can I go on a recruiting trip? Because all my friends were going on these D1 recruiting trips and colleges. So I went to go visit, and at the time, my sister went down to Long Beach State. So it made it a lot easier for myself. My family, we weren't very affluent, so anything that we can get was going to help. So at the end of the day, I went to Long Beach State my freshman year. They did not pay for any of my tuition. They did not pay for any of my books. They said, you're going to have to earn this position. By the time I was a sophomore, they gave me a half scholarship. My tuition was paid for, and my books were paid for. So the only thing I had to pay for, and my parents, was room and board. But that was the trigger of me going to visit. I think in 2 or 3 years being on the basketball team, we probably visited 30 campuses, right? Like Arizona, Syracuse, Kansas stuck out in my mind. My major was communications. And then when I graduated, at the time I wanted to be in broadcast journalism, like kind of what I'm doing now, right? That was my side hustle.
Right.
I worked for some internships, KTLA down in Southern California, some sports radio talk shows. But I saw all these people walking in like with tickets, wearing nice suits. I go, what do they do? And they said, oh, they're the salespeople. And I said, okay, let's go see what sales is all about. So make a long story short, I interviewed at a company called Paychecks. Obviously, that's where you work. And you know what? My college coach, Seth Greenberg, he was my referral. The manager called and said, is Seth Greenberg there? And Seth was in practice. He goes, I'm in practice. What is it about? They're like, it's about Michael Fong. He goes, I will be there. Hold on. He took the call. She said, would you hire him? And he told her all about me. That's how I got hired. I stayed in sales. So 28 years later, I've been in sales and leadership for financial services, Paychecks, American Express, U.S. Bank. That's what I'm doing up to this day. And like I said, for the last year and a half, I'm really turning my passion and what I love, hopefully helping high school students and parents with this college search and admission process.
Yeah, and it's a natural. Broadcast journalism, you still got the mic. You got the mic?
I love it.
Yeah, using podcasting.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 194 is one I am excited about. It is MEFA.org. MEFA.org, and that is spelt MEFA.org. It is actually an acronym for the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. And I know what you're thinking, but I don't live in Massachusetts. Well, guess what? 99% of what they do is national. This is where I go if I want to do a deeper dive into the money, or I want to get some professional development. So if you're looking for more on the money than we cover here, or even a deeper dive on all things related to money, this is a fantastic resource. So they've got a great blog. You can see a lot of very specific topics under their blog. I'm sure will be of interest to you. They've got webinars, which are really, really good. In fact, if the name MEFA sounds familiar, it's because our recommended resource around last year this time was a MEFA webinar. It was the walkthrough of the CSS profile. That's still up. If you go to our website under other resources, you'll see it there. And then they've got a podcast as well. And the podcast is a monthly podcast. Every now and then they do 2 a month, but normally once a month. Some of the things that they've had on the podcast, which are great, how students with disability can save for expenses and prepare for college. You've heard me recommend Going Merry as a scholarship search tool when my interview with Kristen Mosley. Well, why not have Charlie Maynard, the co-founder and the CEO of Going Merry? And he's on for an hour. That was in August, talking about how to use Going Merry to find outside scholarships. Comparing college loan options was one, and then another one, 529 accounts. And one that they did that I really liked was a special one for divorced and separated parents, because things like net price calculators are notoriously inaccurate for divorced and separated and never married parents. And it's also more complicated, especially on the CSS profile. So they did a whole podcast on how to properly fill these forms out if you're married or divorced or never married or separated. And then U Aspire, who I've had on the podcast before, they had a special U Aspire podcast looking at deep dive on indirect college expenses, which is really interesting. So just check out the resource. It's MEFA.org, MEFA.org. When I return to my interview with Michael Fong.
Tell us a little bit more about the format of your podcast, and particularly your student interviews, because that's the part that I feel our listeners will really relate to and identify with. If we've got a listener, and they're looking at a school, whatever it is, let's throw out a school, Ohio State. And if you had done an interview on Ohio State, I haven't done that. I don't do a lot of that. I do a little, but not a lot. I see you as a great complementary resource to what we do, just like Who Cares for Colleges, really. And all I'm trying to do is give our listeners resources. It doesn't have to all come from me. As long as it helps them, then I'm interested.
Right. It's amazing how you said that, the Who Cares for College. I did listen to that podcast. And first of all, props out to that student, because I believe she's only a freshman or sophomore in high school, right?
She's a junior now, but she started when she was a sophomore, and you would never know, mature beyond her years. Yeah.
Right. Because my kids would never have done that.
I wouldn't, right? I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it.
So props out to her. Maybe she has a future and a career. So, and it's funny how you mentioned Ohio State. I've had, two guests, because I love to bring on sometimes 2 guests from the same colleges. Nice. Make a great show. And as some of the people out there listening and following, that's where I get most of probably my audience and followers. They'll say, hey, Michael, what do you think about TCU? What do you think about Georgia? What do you think about Wisconsin, Washington, Colorado, Arizona? I'll reference them back to my episode. I'll say, go listen to episode number, and there you go. You'll have raw stories from a student. So now how that breaks out, all right? Again, when I first started a year and a half ago, Mark, I was just trying to get any student on, okay? Now I have parents are saying, why is it? I'm surprised Michael hasn't invited my student on.
Right. It's funny how that works.
Yeah. It's crazy, because I'll say, hey, here's my little weasel clause. I say they have to have at least gone through 1 year of college.
Yeah, that's important.
Especially even the last year, right? COVID, because they need to have that real life experience. So what I like to do is 80% of my guests are college students, either being sophomores, sometimes juniors, sometimes even seniors, because when they are seniors and graduating, that's a whole different other conversation and discussion. and the child or the student has grown so much from the freshman year to the senior year, right? They may not be so much into partying, the fake IDs, Greek life. They're more concerned about getting a job, meeting companies, alumni to take the next step in their life. But the model is really, I want to talk about, let's say, what were your colleges that you looked at before you picked whatever college it might be? I'm going to use Ohio State, for example, right? You brought it up. So the guest I had on, and I don't even know the exact episode, but I said, you went to Newport Harbor High School, one went to Corona Del Mar High School. So I had two guests from Ohio State. You just finished your freshman year at Ohio State. Talk to me about that, right? What did it take to get in? What were some of your classes? Was Ohio State your first choice? Was it your moderate? Was it your fallback? And what type of grades did you have? What type of classes, rigor did you have to even go through that process if you know, to finally make that selection? And then why did you make that selection? And then I like to go into, all right, what's your major? What are you studying? Did you live on campus? How was that like? So tell me some of the dorms, someone listening. What should they learn from your experience? Or let's talk about Greek life. Were you part of the Greek system? Yes or no? How was Rush? And then I love talking about, and I'll say this on your podcast, let's face it, in college, people want to go out and they want to have fun, maybe drink underage. They want to hear about fake IDs. Parents may not want to hear about it, but I do get into that and saying, let's talk about it. Let's talk about bars that accept fake IDs, bars that don't. And they share real life stories of, you don't want to go to that bar. You want to go to this bar. Here's where a lot of freshmen hang out. Here's where college sophomores hang out. So they'll talk about game day experiences, what it's like a tailgate, right? They'll talk about class size. So that whole real experience and the answers you really want to hear that maybe admission counselors don't give you, that's what I like to really focus on with my guests.
And do you feel they're able to get at the culture of the school?
I do. And kind of like how you and I met, I screen all my guests. I want to make sure they're articulate, right? I want to make sure they're articulate and they feel comfortable with me. Because like you and I can have a conversation and now I feel like I know you, right? And we could just talk. My podcasts are just conversations. Here's what I want it to be like. Let's just say the student or the parent and I are having a conversation. The student, that's my guest. I'm at a bar and we're just talking about that college. What is it like? Right?
That's good. Yeah. You know, I'm really glad that you don't only have freshmen and sophomores, though, because I do feel there's a perspective that a senior and junior bring that, you know, they have a bigger picture of what the school is like. And one thing I'm always very mindful of anytime I do a college spotlight where I break down a college is I need to be fair to this school. You know, I want to be objective on it because you're kind of putting the reputation of the school into the hands of some students. And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. You want to pull the curtain back and let people see how it really is, but you also don't want to unduly throw school under the bus because one person had a bad experience. So how do you balance that?
A lot of that, again, probably goes into the prepping, right? I know, first of all, I know who most of my guests are. It's rare I don't know who my guests are. Here where I live in Southern California, maybe because you know me, I'm extroverted. I know a lot of people. And I'm going to recruit the person. How did I recruit you for my podcast, right? I recruit who I want to go on. I recruit who I want to showcase. Maybe it be a school. And I know that guest is going to be pretty smart and intelligent and not give that school a bad name. They'll be honest.
Right.
But they're not going to throw that school under the bus. There's a reason why I want that guest on. And like I said, most of my guests are students. I love student athletes because that's a whole different perspective. So if you have audience and followers that are high school athletes that want to play at the next level, I do have a lot of student athletes on. March Madness. We just finished March Madness. And because I was a student manager, this was probably the first time I reached out to student managers of the Ole Miss basketball team, the Creighton basketball team, and at the time we didn't know the Baylor University men's student manager,
the championship,
and you know
Baylor
what?
Bears.
I asked Chev, I go, okay, you have your chance. Who's going to win the national championship? And this was like 2 or 3 weeks before. He goes, Michael, I really think Baylor, we're going to win it all. He goes, we have the team. So it's funny because they did win it all. But what I asked those student managers was more of, they're not involved in the Greek system. It's a job, right? And they're only student managers. So we talk about Creighton University, we talk about Ole Miss, we talk about Baylor, we talk about that different side of it because people are student athletes that may want to go that route. I bring on athletic coaches, or college coaches, athletic directors, and then obviously 5-10%. I'll do something unique. I have someone like yourself, a college counselor, because you gave great perspective and insight.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you.
So I try and break it up a lot.
Yeah, and I'm glad that, I also knew that, of course, and I also welcome that because I feel like we have, not really delved into athletics to the extent that we probably should. So anything that is a complementary resource to what we're providing that's quality, I'm happy to introduce it to our guests. So yes, you're a great source for information on students and student life and get that perspective, but athletics is another one. And we, of course, have a lot of parents of athletes that either want to play at the next level or they're super passionate about athletics and just love it and do it in high school and would find an interview with a coach or the student manager or student athlete to be something intriguing.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, I am so excited today. We have a special guest who I'm not going to call a guest anymore because we've actually invited her to be part of our team, and we'll hope she'll be participating at least once a quarter, maybe more if she's available. And she's Sylvia Borgo, and she lives in San Diego, but she's got a really interesting backstory, and I want her to share that first before we talk about UCSD.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. I'm so happy to be here. As you know, I've listened to your podcast now for several years, and it's one that I don't miss. But yeah, a little bit about myself. I live in San Diego, like you said, and we've lived here, my family and I have lived here for almost 20 years. And I came to San Diego. My husband got a job here, but I'm actually originally from Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to school in Los Angeles. And I did have a wonderful opportunity to live in Virginia for 2 years. My husband worked for James Madison University, so we were in beautiful Harrisonburg, right there by the beautiful hiking trails. And then we made it over to San Diego. He's now employed here in San Diego at one of the universities. And I'm just, I absolutely fell in love with San Diego. I'm a true California person. I'm a true California kid. We have 2 kids. One is a senior in high school, and he's going through the whole college search and admission application process. And I have a 9th grader as well, who is, just exploring high school and getting his feet wet there. I was a classroom teacher, actually, for 20 years, and I absolutely loved it. We had an incredible opportunity to actually live abroad for in total, about a year and a half. Back in 2016. So I left the classroom, unfortunately, and I never went back. But I went ahead and started redirecting some of my skills and interests. So I started volunteering for a fantastic community-based organization here in San Diego. It's called Partners in College Success, and they serve first-gen underserved students. And I worked with those kiddos for a few years. I still do, actually. I'm meeting those kiddos tonight. I know we're recording this on Tuesday. And then I went ahead and actually, based on one of the guests on your podcast, Mark, the fabulous Stephen Antonoff, I went ahead and went over to UC Irvine certificate program and got my independent educational consultant teaching certificate. And now I'm an independent educational consultant, much like, yourself and Lisa and so forth.
That is fantastic. And I'm going to forward this to Stephen, if you don't mind. When he hears this, he'll be very happy about that. I have to tell you, Sylvia, I put this out on Twitter, so I'm just going to read this. Excited for the debut of Sylvia Borgo to our team on episode 194. Sylvia adds 10 things: another mom, West Coast, current high school senior going through the process, Latina, public school parent, authentic, sincere, some counseling experience, lots of wisdom, great podcast personality, and like Nika, a 40-something.
That's
so,
right.
Lisa, Dave, and I are the 50-somethings. But another thing, you're a world traveler. So, I was telling Sylvia that I'm going to be in San Diego coming up next May, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. Said that hopefully we can meet unless I'm overseas. She's been to 48 countries, and she's working on hitting the 50th by her 50th birthday. So, world traveler, we'll add that to the list.
Absolutely. That's actually one of my big passions, to try to at least motivate students that I work with to consider studying abroad, whether it be for a summer program, a whole semester, a year. And if they would like, there are some fabulous opportunities abroad also for a 4-year degree. So I know I appreciate many different perspectives, and I'm excited for our young students to consider those as well.
So I have a question. I know you said you went to school in Los Angeles. Did you not mention UCLA because it's such toxic rivalry with UCSD, and you didn't want to mention that?
Oh my goodness, no! I'm a proud Bruin. You'll probably hear me say that every single episode. No, I absolutely loved my time at UCLA. It really is a fantastic institution. I'm sure we can, get into the details about that at another podcast. But actually, the rivalry, Mark, is with USC, the Trojans. So there is no rivalry with UC San Diego, but I have to say, I did tell my senior that he would not be allowed to apply to USC, and that was just kind of as a big joke. But I think he actually took it to heart and is not applying to USC.
Well, believe it or not, that's pretty common. We have a family, they listen religiously, husband and wife. I know they're listening to this, but they're both graduates of University of Washington, and they made one requirement when I was working with them, is that I cannot recommend Oregon to their daughter. So we get that rivalry blood. So let's dive in. Let's talk about UCSD. And I'm not surprised you wouldn't see the rivalry there, because one of the things is relatively new to Division I, right? Previously been a Division II school. So a lot of changes going on. It's a kind of an exciting school. It's one of the hot schools. I know doubled in applicants in the last 10 years. So take it away. Share whatever you want to say.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we've lived in San Diego now for 20 years, and I've had the distinct pleasure of having lots of experiences at UC San Diego. As a matter of fact, actually, if I may, I'm going to get into this a little bit.
Sure.
I taught at a school that was adjacent to UC San Diego, and it was formed by some UC San Diego professors. So they do some fantastic things here on this campus. But let me start off with some basics. So the UC San Diego is one of the 9 campuses available to undergrads. It is the southernmost UC campus, of course, and it is, like all the other UCs, it's a large public, very research-focused land-grant institution. But it's also known for its fair share of sun and surf. I think I read once that San Diego has the 5th best climate in the world. So I have to go ahead and brag about that a little bit. I think the average temperature year round is like 70 degrees. So it's pretty perfect. On UC San
People jealous.
That is
Good
true.
thing that we're airing this in October and not in January or February. Somebody might be like throwing something at their phone right now. No, San Diego is just delightful. And I actually work with quite a few students in San Diego, you know that. And I always say it's so expensive there. And they're like, I'm not leaving this place. This place is paradise.
Absolutely. That is definitely a difficulty, trying to convince Southern California kids to consider other parts of the country. San Diego, the main campus, the main campus where most of the students are found, is about 1,200 acres. But they do have several outlying adjacent centers, like the medical center, which is very close to the main part of campus. And then the Preuss School, UCSD, which I hinted at, I worked at for 13 years. And the Preuss School UCSD is a public charter school. It's a college prep, and it serves 6th graders to 12th graders. And that, if you add the medical center and the Preuss School and the graduate housing, et cetera, that adds about another 1,000 acres to the campus. UCSD serves about 37,000 students, and 30,000 of those are undergrads. The campus itself is very modern. It has a very modern feel. It didn't really establish itself until the mid 60s. And the location around the campus, it's not quite on the water's edge as some of the pictures might lead you to believe. But the water, the beach, the actual like sand and ocean, Pacific Ocean, is really only about 10 to 15-minute walk to the west. And actually, one of my favorite breakfast spots is a place called Caroline's, and that's about 10 minutes away from campus. And oftentimes, my family and I will drive from our neighborhood all the way over to that little spot. It's right underneath the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, which is another famous research hub. The academics, it has over 140 majors. UCSD offers over 140 majors. And it operates on a quarter system. I know you've discussed this in your podcast before. Typically, the quarter system is where students take 3 to 4 classes, and they last 10 weeks of instruction, and then they have a finals week. The 10th week is typically called dead week. And dead week would lead you to believe that the students are not going to class, they're just studying and catching up on projects. But no, they actually still do have class during 10th week, and then they take their finals week. I do have to say the quarter system, as you said before, does move fast, very, very fast. And if students are taking 3 classes, I think that is fairly manageable. But really, if you want to graduate in about 4 years, you probably should be taking 4 classes each quarter, or adding a summer break. And so when you see the graduation rates, which I'll mention in a little bit, of them being having students take over 4 years, that plays into it if they've decided to take several quarters where they only were taking 3 classes. Let's see a little bit more about the academics. It's definitely known for its STEM programs. UCSD has the largest engineering program on the West Coast, the largest engineering school in the UCs, the Cal States, and the West Coast. That includes all the other states as well. But it also has a strong arts program, actually. It houses several art installations and has a little arts district with a playhouse. It has it hosts the Mandel Weiss Center for the Performing Arts and the Conrad Prebys Music Center, where we have the symphony perform and invited authors and artists usually get to speak on campus. Any thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to ask you about the 6 college, I guess 7 college system, because I'm always curious how that shapes the experience at UCSD, because my understanding is they have different requirements, curriculum. Students live residentially oftentimes there. And then, I just wonder how that shapes the institution. Like, do they have different admission rates to the colleges, or is it more based on your majors? Can you kind of go into detail with, Revelle, John Muir, Thurgood Marshall, Earl Warren, Eleanor Roosevelt, and then I don't remember the 6th or 7th names if they have them. I think someone may be waiting for somebody to give $100 million to get naming rights.
Yeah.
But that's something I've always really been curious about. And I was just thinking about this earlier today. How many times would you say you've been on UCSD's campus?
In the last week or in the last?
No, in your whole life.
About 1,000 times.
Yes. So you know what? Want to know why Sylvia's on here? Of all the college spotlights we've done, and this is number 91, I've never been on a college campus 1,000 times. The most is SMU, because I used to study there all the time, maybe 200. So you really, truly bring a lot of expertise. So tell me what you can tell us about the colleges within the university.
Yeah, absolutely. So the college system is not quite, it's not unique to UC San Diego. As a matter of fact, UC Santa Cruz, another fantastic UC, also has a college system. But to answer your question first, are you admitted by major? Does it matter which college you request? Will you be honored that request? All of that. So there are 7 colleges. I think I wrote them down here. So let me go ahead and name them off. Marshall, and well, actually, I'll name them off and then mention a couple of them. Marshall, Roosevelt, Warren, Revelle, Muir, 6th and 7th. And I won't go into the mission of each one of them, but for example, Marshall College is very civically minded, very socially aware. As a matter of fact, when I was a teacher at the Troy School UCSD, the Marshall students were like teaching assistants or teachers' helpers. They could sign up for that experience as part of Marshall. That was one of the offerings, but that was not one of the offerings at Roosevelt. So, for example, and Roosevelt's mission is making of the modern world. They do have different requirements in terms of their GEs, how much writing, for example, writing intensive, some of them can be. But the primary difference is what their mission is, what their focus is, what their mantra is for their college. In terms of admission, you are, well, some of the top majors are engineering, of course, very, very big STEM school, computer science, that's kind of an obvious top major, oceanography, that makes sense, we're right next to the Pacific Ocean, biology, chemistry, econ, psychology, and cognitive science is really very, very strong at UC San Diego as well. And they have, but so you do have to list a major when you use the UC application. You do list your first major and your second major, and you're considered for both. So your application is read for both. So you could go ahead and say, I'm interested in cognitive science, but I'm also interested in linguistics or psychology, for example. And sometimes you are admitted, and if you're not offered your first choice major, you might be admitted to your second choice major as well. So the requirements, there's actually, UCSD has a fantastic website. Hopefully I can dig up a link so that we can add it to the show notes there. But it has a fantastic PDF file that allows you to not only see what the requirements are, the general education requirements are for each college, but also how your AP or IB or dual enrollment community college classes might be able to transfer. So how your AP calculus score of 3, 4, 5 might be able to transfer over to the requirements at Marshall College or Sixth College and so forth. Another reason that sometimes kids choose their colleges also is how modern they are. Not only just the mission and the requirements, which I think should be strongly considered, but also how modern the facilities are. So for example, Seventh College just opened last year, 2020, but Sixth College is the one that is enjoying the most fancy facilities and the most trendy eateries around their dorms and so forth. So that's also something to consider.
So students live mostly in their college, right? Like there'll be residential facilities that are assigned on a per college basis. So that's part of sort of your residential community. What's the process of getting into the colleges? Because the application process is more first major, second major, right? Within the UCs. I know some of them don't let you pick the second one, but UCSD lets you pick two, right? But what's the process for determining whether you get which college you get into?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So, funny story. Back in 1990, when I was applying to colleges, I only actually applied to two. It wasn't that, what a crazy world that was.
I know, it was so different.
I applied to UCLA, obviously, and I applied to UC San Diego. And when this question came up on my paper application that I had to fill out with black pen,
sounds like me.
I just chose the colleges. I didn't really look into the requirements. I didn't look into what their missions were. And back then, I believe there were only 5 colleges, I believe. Anyway, I did not attend UC San Diego, but the way that students choose now, obviously on the UC application portal, and you can list, if I'm not mistaken, up to 3 colleges. So let's say that you are very socially and civically minded, you might want to put Marshall first. If you are worried about like global climate change and impact on our changing planet, that would be the mission of Seventh. And so then you would go ahead and list your top 3, I believe, colleges, and they do try to honor that request. So, for example, Mark, you could be an engineering major. Say, let's
that
say,
would never happen. You better pick. Maybe you should pick Thurgood Marshall as an example. But anyway,
So how about you could be a history major,
there you go.
and you could choose Marshall, and then maybe I could be a history major, but I would like seventh. I would like the perspective or the lens of the changing world, changing planet from seventh. But you and I would both be history majors. We would have to answer our history department's requirements. They would just be met under a certain lens that would offer different seminars, different experiences, and different requirements. Maybe you would take 3 writing courses and I might take just 2.
So one more follow up on that because I'm really intrigued by this. Do you find students pick colleges more because of the amenities and the dorms and what they look like and that kind of thing? Or do you find they're looking at curriculum? Because, from my understanding, some of the colleges have a lot more almost like core requirements, and some have a lot more flexibility in terms of, what you have to take to sort of graduate. What's your experience as to what goes into what students, factors they use to decide which college they'll apply into?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So just anecdotally, the students that I'm working with, the current seniors and past students that are now sophomores, freshmen, et cetera, I do find that the engineers, they know that their engineering requirements are fairly rigorous in the sense that there's very little wiggle room. So I find that the engineers do select their colleges based on how many requirements they will be able to knock out with their AP scores or IB scores. I find that the social sciences students, they choose more on the mission, whether they are socially minded or they want different cultural perspectives or the changing planet and so forth. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, keep going. You're on a roll. What else do you want to share with us? I'm full of questions, but I can take this whole thing over if you don't cut me off and go share what you want to share.
Oh, absolutely. So a little bit about the admissions and applications process. You did mention that they received tons and tons of applications over the last year and certainly the last couple of years with the COVID effects being kind of strange. But last year, they received 118,000 applications, just over 118,000 applications. Which was an 18.5% jump. Their admission rate did drop a bit to 34%. And they do, so now that the UCs are all test blind, test free, I think is the new terminology.
Some people say that blind is like disabilities, not disability sensitive. So test free, score free, test blind. You'll hear all 3 of them used interchangeably.
Yes. So now that they're test free, they are looking at, they used to have 14 points of comprehensive review. So without the SAT and ACT scores, guess what? They have 13 points of comprehensive review. And the UCs are very, very serious about honoring all 13 points. I do want to convey to all the listeners that when the UCs say we really do take a look at your academic GPA and the rigor of your coursework, as well as your answers on the personal insight questions, or the eligibility in the local context, meaning what did your school have to offer and how did you maximize opportunities, your activities and awards lists. They really do look at all of those criteria. They really do. And so that's why sometimes when people ask me, well, goodness, my student had a 3.9, but my nephew had a 3.9 and one of them got in and the other one didn't. What happened there? And you've said this before in your podcast, Mark, you're not privileged to the entirety of the application. You don't know the whole story. And the UCs have always been very good at looking at all aspects of your application. Season is to truly put all the information that you want to convey on your UC application, which, by the way, is open now. You can apply to UC San Diego, all the UCs, beginning November 1st is when you can hit submit on your application. But certainly you'll want to be working on that now, looking at the personal insight questions and so forth. They're looking for 15, that they have A through G requirements, and that is history, English, math, science, foreign language, and the visual and performing arts. Actually, I shouldn't say foreign language. I should say language other than English. It's called LOTE for them. And they want to see a minimum of 15 courses spread across those 5 areas, and actually one college prep course as well as your elective. And I say minimum because most campuses are probably going to be looking at more than just the minimum requirement. Many campuses have students that take all 4 years of history, English, language other than English, math, etc.
Let me ask you an admissions question, because I know UCSD is such a powerhouse with engineering, computer science, and STEM. So how much harder is it getting admitted into UCSD if you're looking at applying into one of those kinds of majors, computer science, engineering, oceanography, some of the STEM-based majors, as opposed to maybe humanities, social science, visual and performing arts? Do you have any thoughts on that from your experience?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I think one of the very loose rules that I use is when you look at admission percentages for any given college, not just UC San Diego, but possibly quite possibly all the UCs and maybe even others. If you're looking at their admission rate for 30%, for example, 34%, I would say that you could easily shave off 5 to 6 to 7 to maybe even 10% if you're in the engineering department, if you want to major in a school in engineering or a major like computer science. And it's not so much that, how can I say this? I think they just get such an overwhelming amount of applications to those departments. And some of those departments are not typically enormous. So sometimes the departments want to keep it that way. They want to have more one-on-one face time with their students. And even though UC San Diego does have the largest engineering department, they are still, I think because they're internationally known as having strong engineering, they're getting that many more applications compared to, let's say, UC Santa Barbara, which is another fantastic institution, which, by the way, has the smallest engineering department of all the UCs, if I'm not mistaken.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. So what can you tell me about La Jolla? Because I hear it's like a paradise, but then I also hear it's just so expensive. It's full of, multimillionaires that buy property there, and it's not the most conducive place for a college student on a college budget, especially if they want to just go to the beach or the San Diego Harbor or do the downtown restaurant scene. What are your thoughts on that? And I've definitely heard it's a school you need a car for. So what are your thoughts on that? On those things? And I heard parking's tough there too.
I know that's why I'm here early today, so that I could park, so I could actually get a parking spot
early, so she could get a parking spot.
So great question. UC San Diego. If you were to send them a postcard, if you were to send them your check for tuition, it would go to a La Jolla address. But La Jolla is really does not really serve UC San Diego students. La Jolla is a very fancy neighborhood with multi-million-dollar homes, and so that's not where the students live or rent apartments. They mostly live probably, I would say, University City. If they do have a car, they would go venture Pacific Beach, Ocean Beach, which are a little bit more of the student-centered beach towns. There are other beach towns in San Diego, like Del Mar, Solana Beach, Encinitas, but those are more family beach towns, and a little bit more expensive. So the vibe in La Jolla immediately is actually, it's a very safe neighborhood, very, very safe neighborhood. It's very close to some very cool shopping centers and fancy grocery stores and so forth. And it's a very walkable area if you want to stay in the immediate area. If you do want to explore the downtown or catch Harry Styles, who's coming into town next month at one of the big sports arenas, then you would need a car. But unlike the 1990s when we were in college, Mark, or when I was in college, they have Uber and they have those little fun scooters, those little motorized scooters. So you could definitely make your way around not only the campus, but the immediate surrounding areas. The students, since you mentioned the students, I'd like to mention a little bit about the student demographics. It's a very multicultural campus, as many of the California campuses are. We'll start off with the out-of-state international student population. I looked up some data, and it is a little outdated. It's from 2019, but I'm imagining that it's a little similar to our current status. 6% of the undergraduates are from states outside of California, and currently, from the 2019 data, 18% are international. But as you and your listeners know, the UC Assembly Bill was passed a few months ago, and they are trying to make sure that all the UCs are primarily serving California residents. No more than 18% of students enrolled at the UCs should be from out of state / international.
Right. So right now UCSD is at 24 for that. Interestingly, Berkeley, UCLA, and UCSD have been the three most, I don't want to say appealing, but they've been getting the most applications from out of state.
Yeah.
And so I noticed in that assembly bill, there's some specific language, talking about those three schools, Berkeley, UCLA, and UCSD. There's a real out-of-state appeal for UCSD, even more so than all of them, but even more so for UCSD. And what do you attribute that to?
Gosh, that's a great question. You've stumped me. I don't think I have an answer for that. Just looking at the numbers that I just stated, and again from 2019 data, 6% of undergrads are from out of state, but 18% are international. And I'm wondering, this is just a guess. I wonder if the international students are looking at more of the STEM fields. They're looking at that pre-professional engineering, computer science, data science, cognitive science. So I wonder if that's what's attractive, because UCSD is very well known for that.
I think I would be flabbergasted if that's not correct. I know I've noticed that everywhere. If you look at MIT, ridiculous demand. Georgia Tech, ridiculous demand, And so, and that's also true for your Purdue's and your Illinois, all the Carnegie Mellons. Look at UW, the University of Washington in Seattle, a total STEM powerhouse, or UTD, University of Texas, Dallas, which is actually in Richardson, Texas, but their information science program draws thousands of international applications. All the powerhouse STEM schools have very, very strong international pull, especially China, India.
Yeah, that makes
which make
sense.
up large portions of all the international students in this country. So I think you hit it there. I noticed for myself when I work with students all over, and in the last 2 years, I've worked with students in 32 different states. And so I think I have a pretty good sense of nationally. I noticed that Berkeley and UCLA are the two in demand the most by far, like outside of California. And then I find UCSD and Santa Barbara feel to me about the same. Like those are the next two that I get the most requests for. And then it would be Davis and Irvine would be the next. So that's just kind of me anecdotal, not based on a study. But does that surprise you?
No, not at all. It does not surprise me. I know all of my students that I work with from San Diego, they all will apply to San Diego. They are looking at UCLA, Berkeley, and then there are some students who have very specific goals and academic and social needs. And so Santa Cruz is a big one for several of my students. But yeah, I think you hit that spot on.
And sometimes it depends on their interest, right? Like if it's someone who's interested in like being a vet, Davis seems to be popular. So I know that some of the schools get different reputations, which is good.
Yeah. 100%.
Well, one of the other things I hear about UCSD is that it's grown so fast that sometimes the classes are big. Do you think there's any truth to that, or is that just rumor?
No, it's absolutely 100% true. A lot of your undergrad classes are going to be at all of the UCs, but since we're talking about UCSD, they're going to be pretty big. They're going to be huge. I don't know what to say about that. That's been going on since I can't speak for what it was in the 80s, but ever since in the 1990s at UCLA, my classes for my first year were 300, 400 students. My largest classes might be a little shocking, but my largest class was this fabulous science class that was lecture style. It was 1,000 students. It was a gen ed science class. It was the history of AIDS. So that'll put you into a history perspective. And it was myself and 999 other students in this giant, auditorium. With that being said, those large lecture classes that are being taught by professors, come with a discussion session. And the discussion sessions are taught by graduate students. And the graduate students are pretty fabulous. I mean, some of my best discussions that I remember and that I when I keep in touch with my students, they say, oh, the graduate students are just as fabulous as the professors. So the discussion sessions are 20, 30, 35 students in a class where you can get participation, where you can get to participate. So that is something to consider. And so you bring up a good point. Who would thrive at UCSD? Well, first of all, a little bit about the student demographics. I already mentioned the out-of-state international rate. 37% of the student body is Asian American. 19% is Latinx, 3% is African American, and 36% are Pell Grant recipients. So they are doing a very good job of enrolling those that whose families make, goodness, what is the cutoff? 50,000, 60,000 under?
It's so hard because the formula looks at multiple things, right? Number of kids in college, age of the oldest parent. It looks at your assets, excluding your primary home and excluding your retirement account. It looks at number of people in your household, but typically family of four with what they call typical assets, first kid, in the 50s and low 50s, right? The new FAFSA legislation is going through is going to raise that. It's going to be good, but until that goes through, it's going to be so. Yeah, the way they technically say it is your income and assets need to be 90% of the average family.
Right.
So that kind of gives people a sense. So that means they're doing an amazing job. Those numbers are incredible. I mean, there are a lot of schools that are, especially private schools, that would love to be at 15%. And even a lot of flagship publics are not at 20 or 25. So that's very impressive, the combination of the racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic diversity, which leads to a question. What about the money? Because when you look at the sticker price, it's very expensive. UCs are some of the most expensive out-of-state schools in the country. I put them up there second probably only to Virginia as far as the most expensive out-of-state places. Michigan, they're around like Michigan, UCs, and then Virginia. And then even in-state, they can be a little pricey for an in-state student, particularly if you're not living at home. So is there money available, need-based or merit-based?
Yes, great question. So you're right. For California residents, the cost for UC San Diego is about $31,000 a year. For out-of-state students, we're talking about 60 because you have that tuition and room and board, which will bring you to 31, and then you have that added tuition markup for out-of-state and international students of about $29,000. So it can be very, very costly. Merit aid is very modest, most of the UCs, but UC San Diego has an average merit aid award of about $2,000 a year, which really doesn't put a dent into that price tag. And there are some endowment scholarships, but I'm not an expert in those. But I do know that some of those endowed scholarships are available to, I'm not really sure who. I think that varies from year to year, who gets those scholarships and how much money is available to be given out on a year-to-year basis. There might be some department scholarships. There might be a music scholarship. There might be a theater scholarship, engineering department, computer science, etc. But again, I think those fluctuate probably from year to year, so it's hard to pinpoint how much money anyone can expect. But I would say don't count on really any money, merit money. And if you are one of the top applicants in the applicant pool, you might get about $2,000 a year, which really would.
And there's a Cal grant. Do you want to just briefly mention what the Cal grant is, which helps? It probably is one of the reasons you're able to have such a high Pell percentage for Cal residents.
Yes. So the students that are Pell Grant eligible, there's also the Pell Grant. There's also, and by the way, every student, if I'm not mistaken, I believe every student is offered the loan possibilities, of course.
Sure.
And then there's many students that get offered work study. And so that brings you up for your own self-help about $5,500, $6,000 or so of self-help. And then if you have modest financial means and you do qualify for Pell Grant, there's also the Cal Grant, there's the UC Grant. And I know that the state of California has the middle class scholarship,
That's
which
right,
I
they do.
believe caps you off. I think you're eligible, and depending on how much you get, depends on your income. But I think if you're making about 110,000 or so, maybe 120, you would be able to get up some portion. I work with I volunteer with the students whose EFCs are almost zero, really, and they are able to make it work and pay completely because of the Pell Grant, the Cal Grant, the UC Grant, and the work study
I like the
plus
word grant.
loans. Yeah.
I hear you. Well, Sylvia, this has been fantastic. Is there anything else you haven't shared that you want to share with us that's on your heart?
Gosh, no, I think that covers it all. I'm a big fan of the UCs for many, many reasons, but I don't necessarily think that they might be what some students might be looking for, unless I like to say that students should have kind of some pretty sharp elbows. You should be able and confident enough to try to advocate for yourself, especially those first couple of years where your undergrad classes will be so large. I know that students here are very enthusiastic and they're very, they're kind of go-getters. And I know that not everybody arrives with that kind of confidence, but if you think you're the type of kiddo that really would love to be heavily involved in your academics and research, and then also make it over and get a good bagel over by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, this is a great campus for you.
Well, thank you so much. I can see your enthusiasm. You're a true Californian. It just resonates. You know, you don't see this, listeners, but we see each other on video, and Sylvia's just beaming with a smile over here. So thank you so much for coming on. And she's also a lady of grace. You guys don't know this, but we were supposed to record this with Lisa, and I sent out a text, 90 minutes to record. And then what happened to me? I took a power nap, set my alarm, but I didn't put it on high enough volume, and I slept through it. So this is our take 2. Otherwise, Lisa would have joined us. And you're also a woman of grace, because you could have fired us before we even started after that. But she's back again. And thank you, Sylvia. And we'll look forward to more contributions from you in the future.
Thank you so much.
Next week in the news, How the Olympics Explain College Admissions by Rick Clark of the Georgia Tech blog. Our bonus content next week is Mark discussing strategies he uses to randomly talk to students when he's visiting college campuses. Our interview is part 2, the final part, with Michael Fong, the creator of the Student Manager podcast. And our college spotlight comes to you from North Carolina. Mark and Lisa will be discussing NC State.
My daughter is currently in her master's program in clinical mental health counseling, trying to be another Lisa.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right, my friend. See you next week, Dave.
I'll see you next week, Mark.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. And you can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. We have a fantastic team of 9 people. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Rouff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Motvich. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Dalianas Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.